Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and I have a Sunday afternoon off, so we're going to be installing some truck parts. So what you're looking at here are RPG lower rear trailing arms. So this is one of their 5-link kit parts. They have a lower, they have an upper trailing arm, and then they also have a panhard bar, all made out of billet aluminum that looks absolutely sexy like these guys. So we're going to be installing this on the 2023 Raptor today in the garage. I think this project is going to go about as smooth as my control arm product on my Ram. Basically, park the truck on a flat surface, undo the factory bolts, and then one link at a time, go ahead and remove the factory, and then swap in the aftermarket one. So a quick overview on these guys. They are billet aluminum. I went with black. It's going to look nice and subtle, but give you kind of a nice tasteful look underneath the truck. The front chassis side has a polyurethane bushing. Very easy to install these. Both ends of the trailing arms did not come with the bushings installed. Sometimes they do, especially on the harder bushing side. But just used a dead blow hammer to put these guys in. A little bit of oil on the inside so it slid into place. This is the chassis side. And then on the back side of the trailing arm, you got your FK rod end. So this was a little bit harder. You got to get a bearing press tool and basically slowly push the bearing into place. And then you have C-clips on both sides. So as far as overall installation, install the C-clip on one side, get your bearing press tool, push the bearing into place, and then go ahead and use the C-clip on the outside of it just to hold everything in place. Along with the bearings and bushings and everything you get in the kit, you get your misalignments. So these are the ones, these are machined. They're going to slide right into here so it fits onto the truck and gives it that nice spacing between the mounting points on the axle. You get grade 8 hardware, which I may or may not use, not sure yet, for both the front and the back. But anyway, let's get the truck pulled into the garage and get underneath the truck, and I'll show you what we're dealing with. All right, so we are underneath the truck, taking a look at the passenger side trailing arm. So like I said, the factory hardware is really nice because on one side, they have these little hook things that attach to the chassis. So when you go ahead and tighten the nut on the other side, this guy goes holds itself in place. So that's why I think I'm going to reuse the factory hardware. Anyway, 15/16 wrench, 15/16 deep and shallow sock is what you're going to need to get everything off. So on the front side, the nut to get the bolt off of the front side of the trailing arm on the passenger side is actually near the muffler. So it's probably going to be easier to use a wrench to get that guy off. And then on the back, the chassis side, the nut is on the wheel side. So very easy to get to with a longer 15/16 deep socket. So like I said, when you remove these, go ahead and remove one side at a time, replace it with the aftermarket one, and then go ahead and knock it out on the second side. All right, so I used a deep socket on my breaker bar to go ahead and loosen up the nuts, and then I went ahead and used my ratcheting 15/16 wrench, which is totally worth the money. Go ahead and buy one at Lowe's, about 18 bucks for one. Totally worth the money because it makes quick work of the nuts on these guys. Now, what's nice on the passenger side, unlike the driver's side, when I did that one, I had to use the jack, but on the passenger side, once you loosen up the bolts, you can see the whole trailing arm is already loose, which means I don't need to jack it up yet to get this guy loosened up. Sometimes what you need to do is jack the frame up to loosen up some of the tension on this front bolt so everything can loosen up and you can pull everything out. So what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and remove all this factory hardware. We could pull the factory trailing arm out. I'll show you it side by side with the RPG one, and then I'll show you how to pop the RPG one in. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reuse the factory hardware. These hook nuts here are really nice, especially when you're underneath the truck trying to torque everything down. So the new bolts, when they go in, are 175 foot-pounds. It's hard when you have a nut on this side and then the bolt on the other side. These little locking tabs here make it a lot easier to go ahead and torque everything down. I don't have a lift or anything, so I can't really get up underneath with a bunch of room. So I'm going to use every advantage I can, and that means I'm going to reuse the factory hardware here. So there is the hook nut on the back as well. It's just on the inboard side, whereas this one's on the outboard side. All right, so here is our factory trailing arm with the RPG one next to it. Apologize for how dirty this one is. Just greasy hands right now. Anyway, factory one, box steel, polyurethane bushings in the front and back. It is a little bit lighter than the RPG one. The RPG one is billet aluminum, so this is a solid block of aluminum that everything's milled out. So it is going to be a little bit more robust. So it's going to add extra strength here, and then it's going to give you serviceable joints on the front and back, which are replaceable. So if you ever wear them out, you don't need to replace the whole bar. Just got to replace the bushings in the front or the bearing in the back. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and swap this guy in there. On the front side of the trailing arm, you're going to want to have that polyurethane bushing, so that's going to be close to the RPG logo. And then on the back, that's where you're going to want to push that bearing into the trailing arm itself. Make sure you have your misalignments. These will work with factory hardware. So let's go ahead and hop underneath the truck. I'll show you the orientation for how we're going to install this and then how we torque everything down. All right, so there is an easier, or I guess the easier way to install the rear trailing arm is install the back portion first on the chassis and then install the front. The reason why you want to install the front last is because there's a lot more play in that polyurethane bushing than there is in this metal bushing once you get these misalignments in there. So line up everything on the rear axle, allow it to drape down. I'm going to use a towel so I could save the finish on the trailing arm, and then we're going to pick up the trailing arm, and it should theoretically drop right into place with that factory hole. We may need to jack up the front just a smidge just to clear some of it, or we might be able to hit this guy into place with the mallet. But let's get the back in first, and I'll show you what I'm talking about as far as angling this guy and using the towel to protect the finish, and then we'll raise it up and see how well it fits without a jack. Okay, so this is what I was saying. It's helpful to have a towel here, because what I went ahead and did is I threaded the bolt, the factory hardware on the rear bushing of the RPG trailing arm. Now I have it teetered down, ready to go to lift up into place to mount it to the factory location for the front bushing. There's a little bit of play in this guy, not a lot of play in the back. That's why you do it from rear to front. In order to get the trailing arm into the rear chassis or into the rear axle bracket, I did have to use a rubber mallet just to get everything negotiated. But now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and lift this guy up into place, drop the factory hardware through here, thread the bolt on the other side, and go ahead and tighten everything down. Once we tighten everything down and make sure everything fits properly, then we'll go ahead and torque everything to 175 foot-pounds. This is where it's useful to have the factory hardware in place, because you're going to have those locking nuts here, so you don't need to worry about the other side. It's just getting a socket on the bolt or on the nut and then torquing it to 175. All right, so I went to install the front, and even though the factory trailing arm came out very easily without jacking the car up, I did still have to get the car jack out. Like I said, you lift it up by the chassis right there, and that will release enough tension on the front of the trailing arm to get that factory bolt slid through. So now that everything's installed, let's go ahead and torque everything down and take a look at the final product. When you are torquing everything down, you have to do it with the truck on flat ground. Get it off the jack stands, let it sit where it's going to sit when it's driving around on the regular road. That's when you want to torque it down. You don't want to torque it down with the car jacked up from the chassis or whatnot. So go ahead and let everything settle, and then go ahead, hit everything with 175 foot-pounds. But let me finish up the passenger side here, and then we'll flip over to the driver's side real quick, because I do want to show you one additional step that you're going to have to do to get the RPG trailing arm installed on the driver's side, but it's very doable, super easy. Okay, so when you are on the driver's side, there is a skid plate on the bottom of the gas tank. You're going to need to undo loosen up the front two 13mm bolts or nuts. There's one here, one there. And then totally remove the two nuts in the rear. Let the skid plate drop down, because the skid plate actually gets in the way of the other side of the factory bolt on the front of the trailing arm. So if you go ahead and loosen up the front, drop the rear, that gives you plenty of room to slide the bolt out that way. So that's just the only difference between the driver's side and passenger side. Otherwise, it's the same exact steps. Remove the factory stuff, put in the aftermarket stuff, torque everything down to 175 when it is off the jack stands. That's pretty critical to make sure everything's torqued properly. So let's get this guy out in daylight here and take a look at the final product and close out this video. All right, so we just took everything for a test drive. No noises, no weird clunks. Everything is working as it should, which is awesome. So let's take a look at the RPG trailing arms, and there you go. You see them in all their beauty. Again, I'm a sucker for anything that pops underneath these trucks like this. I had red control arms on my last truck. I went with black on this one just to keep it a little bit more discreet, kind of tasteful, because that's really the look I'm going for on this particular truck. So anyway, that's how you install the RPG lower rear trailing arms. Super easy. As far as quick overview, you undo the factory 15/16 nuts on the front and rear. Go ahead and pull the factory trailing arm out. Drop in the new RPG trailing arm and tighten everything down. 175 foot-pounds on both the front and rear. Install the rear first and then lift the front up into place. Other than that, it's a very easy, maybe hour and a half tops if you have the right tools. Get yourself a deep 15/16 socket, a shallow one, as well as a ratcheting 15/16 wrench. It makes life a heck of a lot easier. But with that said, that is how you install the RPG lower rear trailing arms. Hopefully I can bring you some more RPG products on the truck, because the quality of these things is top notch. But all that, y'all have a good one. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Appreciate it. Bye.